Let the word go
The
forth.
challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a pioneering program called Challenge.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
That looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of shared values.
With something real.
60 years later, we examine our divisions, our connections, our shared pains and successes in a new program called Challenge 2.0. Churches are closing, faith communities are declaring bankruptcy, and the faithful are increasingly expressing the sense that their religious communities have broken the faith with them. I recently read 2 sentences that provided a useful summary. Religion, as we have known it, has failed to adequately express and address the most urgent challenges of humanity, including the threatened plight of the earth. These challenges are not just ecological or political or economic. They are also spiritual. Those words are in the new book, The Great Search, and that subject and the author are our guests on this edition of Challenge 2.0. So with the magic of technology, which can sometimes be a difficult master, but at times a good servant, we're able through that magic to welcome to this program John Philip Newell, who has been on this program we're pleased to see before. And John Philip is coming to us from Edinburgh, Scotland. He is the author of The Great Search. In my introduction, you heard me mention a couple of lines, and that is this book, and that's what we're going to be talking and focusing about quite a bit today. And also, really the creative impetus and driving source of earthandsoul.org. I'd also like to welcome another familiar face, and that is Reverend Dave Brown, who is both a Presbyterian minister and has been on this program in the venue of discussing interfaith work and cooperation between the different faith traditions. So, Dave, thank you very much for joining us as well.
It's good to be here.
For the purpose of our discussion, and I will again say, JP, I devoured this in the space of a couple of evenings and then went back and started to unpack more and more of what you talk about. At least in my impression, it seemed that there were 2 main threads. One was addressing the failure, or at least the inadequacy of organized religion to address and help us address, I think most importantly, the challenges of contemporary life. And the second is a reassurance that our faith traditions have been able to adapt in the past when it seems like they were coming off the rails. If we could maybe address that first one and the frustration and the lack of sustenance that so many in your book and that we hear just talking with people around us. I understand that that frustration and that need to evolve in a way mirrors your personal experience. Could you share a little bit of the change in your path with us?
Thanks, Jeff, and it's very good to be with you again. Thanks for the invitation. I think the big story of the book is this being a time of religious exile for hundreds of thousands, I would say millions of our brothers and sisters who began life very much within the walls of our religious inheritance and are no longer there. So one of the questions that has been with me for many years is, why not?
Mm-hmm.
And what are the yearnings of soul that are taking us sort of beyond the walls of our inheritance, in a sense? What are the yearnings of soul that are at the heart of this moment? So that's the sort of big story. Trying to address those who have left the 4 walls, as well as those who are trying to remain faithfully in relationship to their inheritance, but who are also longing for more than what tends to be offered in terms of teachings and rituals and vision within the walls of religion as we've known it. Then the smaller story, this is not a book about me, but I think very importantly, it is a big story that is reflected in my own personal story.
Mm-hmm.
A few years ago, I relinquished my ordination as a minister of the church, feeling I could no longer hold together the vision of Earth's sacredness and the sacredness of every human being. That's very much at the heart of my teaching and passion and my writings. I could no longer hold together that vision with the sort of foundational creedal statements and doctrinal statements of Western Christianity, especially as they were articulated in the 4th century when Christianity got into bed with empire. So I think we need to ask lots and lots of questions about what was happening in the 4th century when Christianity moved from being a persecuted minority almost overnight to being a religion of power and prestige and privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of what began to happen in the 4th century is that religion began to serve power, or religion began to sanction what empire wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just speaking about the Roman Empire. I'm speaking also about the British Empire, or I'm speaking about the American Empire, or any nation that in a sense sets itself up over the other nations of Earth, saying that we are more important than the other nations of Earth, and claiming that by ignoring the well-being of other nations or exploiting them or wronging them, we can somehow be well. That's the sort of tension in the book. The awareness of the big story, and me also saying, well, this is part of my story. And increasingly, I stand in the wilderness, as it were. And one of the really sort of clarifying things for me over the last couple of years since relinquishing my ordination is that I've become more aware of the important and creative tension within our Judeo-Christian inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
And we find it right there in our scriptural inheritance as well. And that is a creative tension between the wilderness, as it were, and the temple, or between the prophetic and the priestly. And I see these two as really needing each other. And so while I see myself as more in the wilderness now than in the temple of our religious inheritance, I see that what I should be doing in the wilderness, as it were, and trying to lend my energy and my passion to the important prophetic call for change and for vision for the way forward. I see anything that I or others do in the wilderness, it should really be done in a deep spirit of love for the family and the temple, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's my family. That, I will always see myself as a son of the Christian household. I'm deeply indebted to my inheritance for the Jesus wisdom that has been passed down to me in that stream. So relinquishing ordination was not a loss of faith at all.
Mm-hmm.
It was an act of faith, in a sense, to say, well, this is where I should be now, and I was very clear in myself from the very beginning, and I trust that this is how I'm heard and seen, and that is that the relinquishing of my ordination was in no sense a judgment of many of my dearest brothers and sisters, including Dave. I'm not at all standing in judgment of those who choose to continue in an ordained role. It's more a matter of saying we need one another, but both within the four walls and outside, in order to bring real change and real vision.
We want to explore a little bit further of where that's taken you, both with your organization and certainly as outlined in the book. Dave, I might ask you, you've chosen to maintain your ordination. What particular challenges and frustrations do you align with, as you, and I know you and JP have spoken many, many times, what frustrations most resonate with you?
I have a very vivid memory of a conversation JP and I had after the incident he writes about on Iona as he was beginning the process of giving up his ordination. And my friend, I'll always cherish the vulnerability and the intimacy of that conversation. And it has always set me to wondering exactly where am I on that journey. Jeff, I think it would be fair to say that I've always translated some of the words around my ordination into my own understanding.
Mhm.
I've always had the impulse towards an inclusive spirituality, understanding of Jesus showing us the way and inviting us to walk the way along with other spiritual teachers. And when I was ordained and had to answer certain questions, I confessed to doing some inner translation in order to get the acceptable answer out of my mouth.
Mhm.
Um, Staying within the system in some ways allows me to be heard in some different corners. And if I was to leave it, at least in the context of the United States and where I am now, people are engaged by hearing the pastors say, wait, God isn't this guy in the sky, but a mystery that's in creation and all around us. And
Mhm.
for some, the fact that this ordained Presbyterian minister is making these statements causes them to step back and pay a different kind of attention.
Mhm.
And I want to stay in that capacity as long as I can, maybe to invite organized Christianity in some way in the circles where I move to use JP's words from this really fine book, to focus more on being a resource to people on the great search, to be a place of renewal on the great search, to recognize that people are on the journey that JP writes about and invites us to through the people that he introduces us to in the book. Um, it's my deep sense that the church has gone astray by thinking it's going to be relevant by saying, making these pronouncements and trying to provide these programs where I think really people are hungry to know what life means.
Mhm.
And that has to be the heart of our spiritual communities. So I stay in because perhaps I can help invite people to be on the search that my brother JP writes about in the book.
Mhm.
With that said, if I was forced, which won't happen, but if I had to make an affirmation of traditional Calvinistic Christianity, I would have to give up my ordination. There are some things I could no longer say yes to.
Yeah.
Just like when obeying the constitution of the church meant denying marriage to my same sex siblings, I said I will do that as best as I am able, but I couldn't say I would follow the constitution of the church.
Mhm. JP, as I was reading your book and you offer nine, what I think you call prophetic witnesses, I think it was your brother-in-law that described them as either a cloud of witnesses or a motley crew. We
Yeah.
we should hasten to mention he was not talking about the rock group either. But uh, in reading this, it struck me as I looked at the different people that you included, I thought that makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. They have to be in the program. I guess as you were assembling this and considering who to include and who not to include, who from that crew, if you were to pick one, most closely aligned with your sense of frustration and the need for redirection?
Great question. Well, yeah, I really need to choose all nine of them. But I think I mean there are a number of reasons why I placed Thomas Berry in chapter one, and a number of reasons why I placed Edwin Muir in chapter nine, for instance, and that is true of the locating of all nine
Mhm.
prophetic voices. But I do think that Thomas Berry, whom I draw from in chapter 1, which is about seeking vision and looking for the sacred and expecting to encounter the sacred way beyond any boundaries that religion has placed on sacredness. And to see everything in the universe since the great flaring forth 13.7 billion years ago, to see everything as both essentially spiritual as well as physical. And that is to see everything essentially as unique manifestations of the divine. And one of the points that Berry makes is that humanity was consulting the sacred text of earth and the heavens long before religion came into being.
Mm-hmm.
And he's really inviting us to return to earth and the universe as our primary source of revelation. And I think that religion has done a lot of forgetting that that is our primary source of revelation. So the church has sometimes tried to set itself up as the primary source of revelation. Theologians early in the history of Christianity were saying things like extra ecclesia nulla salus, outside the church, there's no salvation. And then during the Reformation, the Protestant theologians were using language like sola scriptura, that is, the only place of revelation of the divine is Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
And these are tragically reduced perspectives. So I think Barry is inviting us to return to this sense of the universe as sacred text, inviting us to keep reading that text, and the revelation is ongoing. Everything is a living revelation of the divine in its essence. And then, very importantly, he recognizes the place of written scripture, and that sort of tension, creative tension, I think is certainly what I want to align with and what I want to encourage others to pay attention to. So it's not just a matter of sort of looking to earth and forgetting our scriptural inheritance, because in the scriptures, that's where we hear prophetic voice. We hear particularly the prophetic call to identify with the powerless, to identify with those who are homeless, those who are hungry, those who are seeking shelter and sanctuary in our nations. So the prophetic voice is I'm sometimes a bit amazed that so much of the prophetic voice appears in Scripture, in that it was the church that sort of defined the canon, but it's there and it keeps challenging us. So keep the second text, as it were, the text of Scripture, and then very importantly, he says there's a third text. There's the text of the inner soul,
Mm-hmm.
and in that inner text of the soul, he says that's where we can access the imagination. And because we need the imagination, one of the sort of wonderful things that Thomas Berry says, he says the universe is so amazing, it must have been dreamt into being.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes on to say, we're in such a mess, politically, religiously, ecologically. We're in such a mess, he says, we need to dream the way forward. We need to allow ourselves to imagine ways of being, ways of seeing, ways of interrelating that we haven't known before. That is the sort of extent to which we are desperately in need. We need to imagine new ways of being as nations and as a human species and as religions.
Could you just give us a quick, very quick summary in terms of who Thomas Berry was, because not everybody might be familiar with him?
So he was a Passionist priest and American born, but he he was a theologian, but he preferred to call himself a geologian.
Mhm.
Such was his love of earth and his sense of the sacredness of earth. He very cleverly stayed under the radar of the church's sort of theological sort of commissions, or known previously as the Inquisition. Um, um, so and one of the things I've appreciated about Thomas Berry is that he didn't some of the most important things that he wrote and said didn't happen until he was in his 70s. So there's hope for us all, that we can find our voice. So it was in his 70s that he began to publish, and things like The Dream of the Earth and the Sacred Universe and so on. But really managed to somehow stay under the radar of the Vatican,
Mhm.
in terms of whether they would push him out, and they did not push him out. So he was allowed to continue to be a voice within
Mhm.
the greater communion of Roman Catholicism.
Now, you have broken the cloud of witnesses, prophetic witnesses, into, you have 9 of them, and you broke them into 3 different groups. Can you just give us a brief overview of what those clusters, what those groups mean, the significance, and how you intend that to lead the reader from one point to the conclusion of your book?
Some of it was convenient to realizing that I wanted a feminine voice at the heart of each section,
Mhm.
because I think that this return to a sense of the sacredness of earth is inseparably accompanied by a return to a sense of the sacredness of womanhood and of the divine feminine. So part of the structure of the book was realizing I want a wise feminine figure at the heart of each of these sort of 3 sections. So the first section is really is saying what are we searching for?
Mhm.
And it's in that context that I speak about seeking greater vision, seeking true relationship with earth, and seeking a sense of the presence of the divine in every moment, in every encounter, in every person, in every life form. Then the second part of the book is why are we searching?
Mhm.
And in response to that, I'm saying we're searching because we need awareness, we need a greater consciousness of the soul of Earth and the soul of humanity. We're searching because we need healing, we need the grace of wholeness, and a knowing that the wholeness of the part and the wholeness of the whole are inseparably connected.
Mhm.
In other words, our nation cannot be well if the other nations of earth are unwell. I cannot claim to be truly well if you are unwell, that
Mhm.
our well-being, our healing belongs inseparably together. And then the third part of the second section of the book is we're seeking because we need love. We need to come back into relationship with what the prophet Rumi calls
Mhm.
love madness, and to see that is that is the greatest energy for change and true interrelationship and healing and vision.
Mhm.
And then the third section is to do with sort of how we are searching, and that's to do with needing to re-access wisdom. And by wisdom, I'm not meaning sort of needing to conform to something outside of ourselves, but to get in touch with what it is to be made of God and to know the wisdom of the divine deep within us. And then our need for meaning in both the joy of life, but also the struggle and sorrow of life. And then the final chapter in section 3 of the book is seeking faith, and that's not about coming back to see faith as assenting to certain sort of propositions about the divine. It's about coming to see faith as living faithfully in relation to the immortal shining or the light of the divine at the heart of one another and at the heart of earth and every life form.
You raise some very key questions and experiences that I think resonate with me and with many people out there. And one that we hear people say a lot of, if there is a God, how could God allow this to happen? And you have a very deeply expressed example of that in your book. So I'd like to say thank you to both you and to Dave. And we're going to pick up this conversation in our next edition of Challenge 2.0 next week. So JP and Dave, thank you so much. And we'll be continuing this conversation shortly. And to all of you out there, I hope you'll join us again as we continue this conversation next week.